Good morning, students. Welcome to the Google class. It's nice to see you all here. It's a new method of teaching and learning. Well, students, before I could begin my class, I have few instructions for you. As usual, we'll be giving you uh, the sheet begin with an end in mind, where you have the prior knowledge, followed by the summary and few question answers. This is for you to understand the poem before we could start it. The instruction that I would like to give you are all the work should be in journal, and you should follow this very strictly. Don't write in paper, but see to that all the notes are written in the journal only. And the poem is explained in the form of a PPT presentation, where you'll be able to understand and analyze the poem. The poem is explained to you, and even I will be further explaining it to you, where you have a full understanding of the poem and the poet's perspective and what he would like to convey through the poem, The Wild Swans at Coole. So, let's begin our class. So, before we could understand and know about the poem, students, it's very important for us to know about what the author wanted to convey in the poem The Wild Swans at Coole. The Wild Swans at Coole is written by William Butler Yeats. Yeats wrote this poem in 1916 when he was 51 years of age. Coole Park is in Galway, was the home of Lady Augusta Gregory, Yeats' friend and patron. You may ask me, what's the meaning of patron? Patron is a wealthy or an influential supporter of an artist or a writer. In the poem, he reflects on how his life has changed since he was a younger man and walked with a lighter tread. In reality, Yeats had not been carefree in his youth, but for the purpose of this poem, we must suspend the disbelief and take him at his word. In 1916, this is his background. Yeats' loved Maud Goney was widowed. Her husband, Major John McBride, had been executed by the British for his past in the Easter Rising. Maud Goney went to France to work as a nurse with the war wounded, and Yeats followed her to propose marriage once again. Once again, she refused. In 1917, Yeats married Georgina Heidi Lees and moved into Tour Ballylee, a house near Coole Park. Yeats begins his poem by describing the beauty of Coole Park in autumn. Details such as brimming water, dry woodland paths bring this peaceful scene to life. It's mentioned in the first line of the poem. The brimming water of the lake contrasts with the dry paths. It is as if the lake and its occupants represents life and growth, while we can see the land where each stand is barren. Autumn is linked with slowing down and dying. And you can also see that the words are there, where the swans are counted, and each count the swans and says that there are 9 and 50 of them. Swans mate for life, so why is there an odd number? You may ask me this question, students. Well, is one of them like Yeats alone? The repeated M, S, and I sounds in this stanza emphasizes the peace and quiet. So we can see that the tone of the stanza is quite detached. The descriptions are given without any obvious emotions. Coming to the second stanza, you can see that Yeats became far more personal, as he recalls that it is 19 years since he first counted these swans. Although logic tells us that these are unlikely to be the same swans, we suspend disbelief and accept that this is just an artistic construct. Suddenly, before Yeats, uh, finish is counting all the swans rise into the air. There are they run on lines, suggest moments, and reflects the swans fight. The onomatopoeia is given there clamoring, uh, which you can see that captures the clapping and beating of the swan's wing. The form ring, which is a symbol of, and perhaps that reminds Yeats that while he might change, the swans still remain the same. We can also see that the poet reflects how everything in life has changed since he first looked at the swans on the lake. All is changed. He is not as young, as carefree as he was when. The line says, lighter trod. His heart is sore as he thinks of the loss of his youth and of his failed romances. The description of swans' wings in flight, the bell beat of their wings, is particularly effective here in the lines of the poem. The alliteration is bell beat, where you can see how they captures the steady beat of the birds. The swan has huge wings as they fly above his head. When we further look at the lines, we can see that how it's wondering where the swans will go next, how they will take delight in men's eyes. Perhaps he means that they are unchanged and will continue to bring pleasure to others who stand, as he does now watch them glide one more on the still water. We have to understand here, students, that the poem is set in autumn and winter. That will be inevitably follow for the poet. The swans seem untouched by everything and will continue to drift the still waters. He may be thinking of his creative life or his love life, or both, when he reflects on the changes that time has wrought. The swans are unchanging, content, and immortal. He is none of these things. Now let's look further in the PPT presentation for a deeper understanding of the poem and what the poet wanted to convey through the poem The Wild Swans at Coole. The Wild Swans at Coole, written by William Butler Yeats. The setting is Coole Park, Ireland. Coole Park was a retreat to Yeats. The place belonged to Lady Gregory, an important name in Irish literary revolution. The poem is a regular lyric written 5 stanza, each consists of 6 lines verse. You must be wondering why 59 swans. The poem talks about the sadness and the poet, a melancholic man. W.B. Yeats is wandering through grounds of park when he sees a flock of swans floating on a lake. The sight of the swans reminds W.B. Yeats the first visited Coole Lake 19 years. All of a sudden he feels very old. He thinks about how much life has changed in 19 years. The Wild Swans at Coole is a beautiful poem. The poet in this poem wonders about time, morality, and pleasure of the company. William Butler Yeats was born in 1865 in Dublin. He was the greatest writer of the 20th century. Although he spent his childhood in London, Yeats' poem reflects his deep emotional attachment to his native land, Ireland. He was a staunch supporter of Irish nationalism. He devoted himself to native subjects, writing poems, play, short stories, and novels with Irish characters and setting. Many of his writings reveal a dreamlike nostalgia. He was a modernist who experimented with free verse and a symbolist who used elusive images and symbol of his career. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923. He laments the loss of the youth. The whole poem talks about it. The Why Swans at Coole is a poem that deals with the aging process of William Butler Yeats. It is a deeply personal poem that explores the cycle of life through nature. The poem is set in Coole Park in autumn, which is located on Lady Gregory's estate. The poet is on or near the shore of a large pond and is observing the swans. It has been 19 years since the first time he came to this place, and it is on this visit that he begins to realize that he is getting older. The poet parallels nature in the poem as it represents his present state, while in the poem there is a contrast between the poet and the swan because the swan is used as a metaphor for the poet's youth. The poem is written in iambic pentameter and consists of five pairs of stressed and unstressed syllables. Before we could start the poem, I'll read the poem, stanza 1. The trees are in their autumn beauty, the woodland paths are dry. Under the October twilight, the water mirrors a still sky. Upon the brimming water, among the stones, are 9 and 59 swans. First line of the poem gives a beautiful description of Coole Park. The first line of the poem tells that the trees are in their autumn beauty. This presents the reader with a sense of maturity. The trees are ready to complete their yearly cycle by losing their leaves. A vision of bare branches come to mind after reading this line. The leaves of the trees are shed. What you can see are protected the skeleton of the trees. Like the trees, the poet also feels he will lose something as well as when his own cycle nears completion. We can see that in this poem, the leaves can also be associated with the poet's youth. Like a tree, without its leaves, man without his youth is vulnerable. The poet will lose his youth, and in his old age, he too will be exposed to the harshness of the world. The use of the line which says, the woodland paths are dry, in line 2, reinforces the first line of the poem by presenting the reader with an image of bride. We can see the trees are in their autumn beauty. The line which says, upon the brimming water among the stones are 9 and 50 swans. This is very prominent in the poem. He compares himself to the environment around him. This is related to Yeats' own life. Swan is a symbol for the woman he loves. Poem is a lamentation for his unrequited love. The second stanza. The 19th autumn has come upon me. Since I first made my count, I saw before I had well finished, all suddenly mount and scatter wheeling in great broken rings upon their clamorous wings. Indeed, it turns out Yeats has always counted the swans for the last 19 years and is counting them this autumn. Yeats observes all of the swans rise up and scatter, circling in imperfect rings in the air just above the water. The poet also repeats the word autumn in order to emphasize that he is aging and fading while the swans remain beautiful. The meaning here is a scatter wailing gives the swan a wild, untamed air. They are natural, unbridled. He says that the stillness of the counting persona, what you see, is contrasted against the movement of the birds. We can also look here and see the paradox, the clear contradiction. The swans must be subject to the cycle of change. We can look from that, from the poem and the lines that it is 19 years since Yeats first visited the park and saw the swans upon the lake. On his first visit, he attempted to count the number of swans. However, the swans flew into the air before he could finish counting them. The strength, clamorous, that means noisy, and power of the swans is suggested by the poet's description of them flying away. I have looked upon those brilliant creatures, and now my heart is sore. All's changed since I hear him at twilight. The first time on the shore, the bell beat of their wings above my head, trod with lighter tread. Now here we can see that these brilliant means brightly shining as well as generally excellent. Swans once again has underscored just how much has changed in those 19 years. Here the poet wanted to tell you that he was a young man in his early 30s and now, but he is in his early 50s. And this late middle aged, okay, and he's unmarried and without children, giving you a contrasting that first twilight evening when he heard the wings of the swan nearly 2 decades ago with the deeper twilight of his own life as he grows old. Twilight, repetition of symbol, indicates cyclical nature of time. It also associates swans with mystical dreamlike state. You have the word there, bell beat. Bell beat is an alliteration that echoes the sound of the wings. Break in iambic rhythm adds emphasis between the young man footsteps, and you can see here and heavy now how heavy he feels right now. You can see lead means pentameter, tread is a trimeter. We can look at the poem and see that how the poet admires the swans, calling them brilliant creatures, but the sight of them makes them feel sad because his life has changed so much since he first saw the swan 19 years ago when he was a much younger man. That's why the last line is ambiguous to some extent, where we can see that how Yeats himself is walking lightly. Back then he trod with a lighter tread. His body was youthful. Unweird still, lover by lover, they paddle in the cold, companionable streams or climb the air. Their hearts have not grown old. Passion or conquest, wonder way they will attend upon them still. The swans' hearts have not grown old. Their lives are still full of passion and adventure. That's what is told passion and conquest. The swans are not alone, they travel in pairs, lover by lover. The old adage about swans, of course, is that they mate for life, hence, lover by lover. So, even the streams they paddle in are companionable, suggesting the companion Yeats himself doesn't have. The swan's hearts have not grown old. Yeats tells us that They are possessed of the same youthful passion and vigor. And he tells us that the swans are free to fly anywhere they please, wander they will. The poem gives a clear explanation about how the poet admires the swan and feels that the swans are always together. That is, they are able to be together, and the sense of loneliness probably is what is making him think. Cold, companionable, alliteration, and enjambment joins this line, connecting what appears to be contradictory senses, adding to the distant mystery of the swans. Stanza 5. But now they drift on the still water, mysterious, beautiful. Among what rushes will they build? By what lake's edge or pool delight men's eyes when I awake some day to find they have flown away? But now they drift on still water, explains us and tells us that comes to the grips that memories have gone. Mysterious, beautiful, admires memories so much. That's why it's so difficult to let go. The word which says by away doesn't want to lose memories. No, they will be. Flown away is a repetition of F sound, emphasize the elusive nature of the swans. Yeats concludes the wild swans at Coole by telling us how the swan drift on the water, an air of mystery attending them. He ends with a question: where will the swans, being wild swans, fly away to, and in which lake they'll build their homes? When Yeats discover one day what they have flown away from Coole Park, where will they be? It, it's very apparent in the final stanza to see that Yeats isn't merely using the swans as a symbol for lifelong love, but we can also see that the swan is very beautiful and mysterious as creature. We can look and know why swan is why they are mysterious and they will remain young forever. He is sure that they will leave this lake and settle in a different place. They'll move sooner or later. He's also explaining to us and saying that he is sad because they'll move to another place. Seeing them please man's eyes. He is quite envious here, and we can see they live in order to please others' eyes. He says that the poem gives you a clear tragedy of W.B. Yeats telling that is not growing old alone and feeling it very keenly about it, but rather growing old and losing feeling altogether. So he's saying that he has lost the loss of the feeling that is experienced with age. Mostly what we can see is that his fear of growing old is seen in the stanza, and we can also see that um, the swans' hearts have not grown old. Their lives are still full of passion and adventure, we can see, and each feel that he will wake up one day and they will be gone. He wonders where the swans will build their nest once they leave Coole Park. Among what rushes will they build? He also tells wherever they go, they will bring delight to men's eyes. This frightens the poet. The literary devices that are used in the poem, we have the symbols, we have the swan stands for imperishable youth, The bell beat of the swans symbolizes a relentless passing of time. The phrase which is given, autumn twilight, symbolizes an imminent end. Companionable streams suggest the intimate passion the swans have. The number 59 is given to you, that symbolizes something odd. Since swan pairs mate for their entire life, the last swan is lonesome as a poet. We can look at the image and imagery also. Further in the 3 slides, in fact, I have explained the literary devices, and I am explaining to you here so that you can understand the entire stanza with the dry woodland paths, the still sky, October twilight. This all gives you or establishes a picture of serenity and loneliness and builds up the idea that nature is on the threshold of death. So the next 2 slides also, you have the poetic devices that I have used. Contrasting, you can see the second stanza, which describes the sudden mount of the swans. This creates a powerful image of their unending energy and vigor. We have metaphor in line 4. The water mirrors a still sky, in which the lake is said to be like the still sky. You have alliteration in lines 17 and 18. The bell beat of the swans. We have personification in line 22. Their hearts have not grown old, that declare the swans as having hearts, a human quality. We have the repetition. The words dry and still are repeated a number of times. We have onomatopoeia, the expression. The bell beat of their wings above my head tends to arouse the sound of the wings of the swan as they fly off. The theme gives a clear explanation of growing older. In this poem, Yeats is preoccupied with growing older. He is struck by the fact that 19 years of his life have rushed by since he saw the first swan. He is no longer as youthful and carefree as he used to be. He is weighed down by the cares of middle age and no longer walk on the light tread of youth. The setting of the poem in autumn is significant as the poet is in the autumn stage of his life. In the 19 years, he has grown older, while they seem not to have changed at all. They are unweird, whereas he has grown old and tired. The swans' hearts have not grown cold and are still with passion and adventure, are no longer a big part of his life. They will soon leave his life completely, just as the swans will fly away from the lake of the Coole. The beauty and mystery of nature is also one of the theme. The poet describes of Coole Park with its trees and tranquil lakes. He also praises the majestic and inspiration beauty of the swans. He regards the swans as graceful and elegant, but he also considers them powerful and strong as they suddenly take to the air. There are few questions like you can ask for yourself, students, like describe the park that the poet walks through. What did the poet see when he was in the park 19 years ago? Why does the poet feel sad? How does he describe the swan in the 4th stanza? How is he different to the swans? So with this, we see that the explanation is done. You have any doubts, you can ask me when we have the Google Meet and take further explanation. I would suggest you to read the poem, go through the PPT presentation once again, try to understand and get a understanding of the poem clearly. Thank you, students. That was the end of the presentation.